Hi everybody, my name is Leanne Alexander. I'm here at the UPCI headquarters, and I'm excited today to have with me Stephanie Gossard from Able Ministry. We're going to talk to you today in a video to come about ministering to individuals with special needs and disabilities. This is an important topic, and I'm so thankful, Stephanie, that you've taken time to come and address this very important subject. Now, you're here representing Able Ministry, so start out by telling us about Able.
Sure. Able Ministry is a program within the Ladies Ministry of UPCI. And it was created to support families and individuals affected by disability. So it started whenever Denise Wynn, who is the director of Able right now, she wrote a book about her child with autism and a seizure disorder.
Sure.
And to put it nicely, that the church that she was attending was less than supportive.
I see.
And so she wrote about her life at that time. And Gwen Oakes, who was the ladies president, read that book, and she said, no, this cannot continue. We've got to start a ministry.
Sure.
And so the ministry was born out of that burden
I see.
that she had.
And supports now individuals and families who are encountering disability.
Correct.
Absolutely. Well, that's a beautiful ministry. We're thankful for that, and thankful that you're here, Stephanie. So let's start this conversation. You know, as we travel, we've been blessed to travel together, some speak at some conferences, and I'm hearing more and more churches that are recognizing this need, like you've just described in Sister Denise's situation. And so more churches are starting to have this conversation. How can we be helping? But let's just take it back to square one for a moment. Let's say that a church has not really become aware of this need. Why should we be talking about this? Why should churches care about us? Just take us back to square one and talk about the why for this ministry.
Sure. There are two scriptures that really speak to my heart when it comes to this topic. So the first one is back when Moses was talking to God about how he couldn't go do what God wanted, right?
Yeah.
And so God says, go talk to Pharaoh, and Moses is like, no, I can't speak. And God's response was interesting. So he says, who made man's mouth?
Yeah.
Mute, right? So who made the mouth that can't speak?
Right.
God did. The deaf, the blind, God created that. And would we choose, like in our lives, would we choose to have a disability? Like in my personal life, would I choose to have it? Probably not. But God chose that, right? The other scripture that I love is in 1 Corinthians, when it's talking about the body of Christ and how we're all members, right?
Sure.
So you have a different purpose than I have,
Right.
and God has placed each member into the body specifically. And then he talks about the members that are necessary. And so whenever we think about who do you think are the necessary, like at church, who do you think are the necessary people? Who do you think?
We're going to start with the pastor.
Right, exactly. Can't have church without a pastor.
Right.
Who else would you think of?
Well, then we've got to have musicians, right?
You can't have church without music,
Right.
right? Yes, exactly. So those are the people that we think about. But it goes on to say that those who are feeble are necessary. And then it goes on further to talk about how we need to care for each other. And I just love that those two scriptures really have spoke to me.
Beautiful.
About why.
Yeah, so the church is called to this ministry, whether we've thought through it or not.
Correct.
So let's talk about the context of teaching. We got a lot of teachers watch these videos for practical teaching tips. Okay, teacher has, let's go with the children. Let's talk about the children's teachers. Children's class, the teacher has a student that perhaps the teacher is concerned there may be a disability of some kind here. There's some kind of special need.
Yeah.
What do they do to get started? Do we start with a conversation with a parent? What do we do? Talk to us about getting started if we suspect there is a need in our class.
Sure. Well, the first thing I want to do is tell you what not to do.
Okay.
And the reason I can tell you this is because I have personally done this.
Sure.
So what you don't want to do is you don't want to go up to the parent and say, hi, does your kid have ADHD?
Yeah. Ouch.
So I actually did that.
Okay.
It was not a fun conversation
No,
at all,
not
so I
good.
wouldn't recommend that you do that. But what you can do is you can start with a conversation about behavior.
Okay.
And so you can go up and say, sister, I've noticed that when Anthony comes to Sunday school, he can't seem to sit still. And when we're doing the story, he doesn't really listen, and he's constantly poking the kid beside him. Can you tell me, does he do this at school?
Okay, yeah.
And what do they do?
Right. Very good.
So that's a good place to start the conversation. The good news is that school has the little Anthony for much longer than we do in Sunday school. They have access to a bunch of experts, and they are very committed that Anthony learn.
Right.
And so they have figured it all out. The other interesting thing is that if Anthony's disability was severe enough, they would have something called an IEP, or an individualized education plan. And that is a humongous document where they detail out all the behaviors that Anthony has and then what he needs for support. And so if you have a child that has a significant disability, first of all, the parent's probably going to tell you.
Sure.
Right? They're probably going to call you before they even bring their child to Sunday school and say,
is this possible?
Right. Yeah. But you can start there. Able Ministry, as well as Pentecostal Publishing House, has created a document called a spiritual IEP. And it's basically a form that has 20 questions. You can sit down with a parent, just ask the questions on the form, parent answers, you write it down, and it will tell you everything that you need to support a child.
We're so excited about that resource because it's a first step in having these kinds of conversations, guiding a teacher, because let's face it, a lot of us as teachers, I don't have a background of formal education in this, and that tool, I'm very excited to give our teachers some direction and some guidance to have some conversations to prepare and to support students with a special need. So that's beautiful. Now let's go a step further. So I just mentioned many teachers like myself, we don't have a background of formal education in this area. So perhaps we feel a little, we want to help, we care about this need, this kind of, whoa, we're jumping in the deep end of the pool. Are there maybe, we hear phrases like a child's on the spectrum, we hear, it seems like there's such a gamut of needs. What would we do to prepare ourselves? Are there certain types of needs that we should research? Are there certain behaviors we should anticipate in our classrooms? Maybe speak to some of that.
Sure. So the first thing I would say is just start with the class you have.
Okay.
So all of us know that there are kids in our classes that you look at as, you might look at, maybe it's just me, you look at as those problem children, right?
Sure.
So there are kids that have behaviors that are a problem.
Right.
So think about those individuals in your class, and then try to look at it through the lens of what if their behavior was caused by a disability?
Okay.
So just kind of start there.
Yeah.
Right? So the kid that is constantly distracted, what if it wasn't because he's just a little terror, but it was because he had a disability that caused him to be distracted and not able. Or that kid that's always getting up and running around and causing chaos, what if it was his body needs movement, and that is why? So I would start there.
I see.
You did mention spectrum.
Right.
So spectrum refers to autism spectrum disorder, which is a really prevalent diagnosis right now. So 10 years ago, it was 1 in every 110 kids had autism spectrum disorder. And today it's 1 in 58.
Wow.
In school.
Wow.
And so if you haven't, you're probably going to have a person in your classroom with autism spectrum disorder.
Okay.
And so the thing to remember about it is it's a spectrum. So you've got, on one end, you've got people who are very affected. And then on the other hand, you've got what we call high functioning. And high functioning is not a diagnosis, it's just how we describe people. And so if you look at the higher functioning side of things, it might be people who have differences in communication. They might not pick up on body language. They might not pick up on sarcasm. So these are kids that might be in your class and you might not notice, but then there are also people who just speak their mind and don't have a filter.
I see.
And so they are kids that don't really fit in quite and may have problems making friends.
Sure.
And so that's on the higher end of the spectrum.
So we can begin preparing ourselves by looking for resources, and that's where ABLE comes in. So tell us about some resources from ABLE, and then information if somebody wants to get plugged in.
Sure, for sure. So ABLE Ministry has a Facebook page. It's ABLE Ministry UPCI. On the Facebook page, we have a bunch of experts. Over almost 2,000 people have gathered.
Excellent.
I know, affected by disability or interested in the topic. And there are resource pages. The Spiritual IEP is out there. If you aren't on Facebook, then go out to the Ladies Ministries website and go to the ABLE page. And there are a bunch of resources out there.
Wonderful. Well, we are so grateful for all you're doing and all the team's doing with ABLE to provide these resources and information and support all of our church community. And so I want to thank everybody for tuning in and watch this video. I want to thank you for being part of this. We're going to come back next month and continue this conversation with more detail about how we can minister to individuals with disability as we're being the church together and caring for one another. So thank you so much for being with us. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.